Hey crafty friends, Kim from Stamping Imperfection. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm actually working on some embossing techniques, and I'm talking about embossing folder techniques. And I have 4 new embossing folders from Stampin' Up! That I wanted to share with you today. I love these. I've been playing with some inking techniques. Some techniques you emboss first and then ink. Some techniques you ink the inside of the folder and then emboss, so it embosses and inks at the same time. So I want to share those with you, and while I do that, I wanted to share that I have been working on, if you've been watching my YouTube channel, I have been working on a technique binder, and so far I've got over 40 techniques in here. And today I'm sharing these embossing ones, and I have made, for all of these techniques, I have made these little 3x4 cards. So these are printable and they are available for free on my blog at Stamping Imperfection. There's a tab at the top that says Techniques, and if you click on that, you'll find all my older, you'll find all my previous videos and all of the different technique printables. And today's printables will have 8 different techniques, and it will include techniques for just ordinary embossing with regular embossing folders. It will include 3D embossing folders, and it will include hybrid embossing folders that die cut and emboss at the same time. So it will include those inking techniques that I was telling you about. So let's get started with that. So I wanted to just start by telling you about these 4 different embossing folders that I have. These are the newest ones available from Stampin' Up! That I have, and I have really been enjoying playing with these. So this is the first one I wanted to tell you about, because this is like the original style of embossing folder. It is an ordinary embossing folder, and when you open it up, one side feels kind of flat, the other side feels like it's got a lot of raised parts, and it is a good size for a regular A2 size card. You can easily fit a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of cardstock in there. So you would, if you have something like this, like a card front size, it easily fits inside the embossed area. So that actually works nicely. So that's one kind. This one is called Starstruck. This was free. This is actually one of the celebration freebies that Stampin' Up! Has to offer during the month of February, until the end of February, in fact, or while supplies last, I should say, and this is 2025. You can, for every $60 you spend, you can choose one celebration freebie. This Starstruck embossing folder is one of those freebies. So I'm going to show you, if you've never embossed it before, I'm going to show you how to use this quick and easy. Then there are the 3D embossing folders, and these are a little bit bigger. I believe these are 6x6. They're a nice size because I like to scrapbook and do a lot of memory keeping, so I love having a slightly bigger piece that I can actually do a larger piece of paper and use in my scrapbooks. So that's really nice. But this is a 3D embossing folder. This one's called Soft Waves. It's part of the Ocean Friends suite, and you can get it separately, or you can buy the whole suite, or different parts of the suite. But when I open this up, it's very textured on both sides. I don't know if you can see the texture on both sides, and it feels textured on both sides. So when you run this through, you get a super amount of texture on your paper. And these embossed backgrounds, whether you're using a regular one like this or a 3D one, when you add this, even if you're just doing white cardstock, and you get this beautiful texture and a little bit of dimension there to your panel, if you put something in front of that, like pop this up on dimensionals, add some ribbon and maybe a couple of embellishments, and a card base along with your sentiment. I mean, you've got a beautiful card, and there's some elegance to that beautiful white textured background. So I love embossing. I think it adds a really nice, interesting dimension to your card. So this is a 3D folder, and you use it pretty much the same way, except you'll need a different sandwich in your die cutting machine, and I'll talk about that. And this is another 3D embossing folder. This is called Plaster Painting. This was one of their online exclusives. I love this. Again, you can see all the amazing texture on both the front and the back. Now, when I talk about the front of the embossing folder, I'm referring to the side that has the Stampin' Up! Logo. That's considered to be the front. And notice that they always put these lines. All of these have the lines on them. And that's so when you put your paper down in there, you can line it up. If you want to make sure you're getting it straight, you can line it up with that registration line right there. Just like that. So just keep in mind that line will actually allow you to line it up. So that's actually a useful thing. It's not just decorative. This is a 3D embossing folder just like the Soft Waves one. It's just bigger. This is 6 by 8.5. And imagine if you are a scrapbooker and you do 6 by 8 inch albums, you could actually add some of this texture to the entire background of your layout. So I think that's pretty fantastic. The last kind of embossing folder is called a hybrid embossing folder. This one is called Beautiful Butterflies. It is part of the beautiful, I think it's the Beautiful Bokeh suite. And you can get the stamp, you can get the embossing folder with the die cuts separately, or with the stamp, or with the whole suite, however you want to order it. Now, how this works is it is with a die set. So usually you order the hybrid embossing folder and you get the embossing folder and the die set. And you can see this has quite a few dies in it. Now, I added the magnets because I find the magnets keep my dies in place and I don't lose them if I'm using my magnets. So I've added the magnets to the packaging, and I actually really like that. But there's going to be one die, in this case it's one die, that actually fits inside this embossing folder. Now, if you've never used dies before, they have two sides. One side is very smooth, one side has a little raised edge. And that raised edge is actually the part that does the cutting. This is a die cut piece. So when you use these two together, you will cut the paper and emboss it at exactly the same time. And how this works is it fits on the inside front cover. There's the logo. So it's going to fit on the inside front cover, and it fits very nicely around that butterfly. It actually doesn't move around too much. And one of the things you'll notice is I've placed it so that cutting edge is up toward the center of the embossing folder. So when I put my paper in between the two pages, that cutting edge will actually be on top of my paper. So when I run this through, I'm going to get a beautiful die cut butterfly that's also embossed, and they're beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So that is a hybrid embossing folder. So you have regular embossing folders, hybrid embossing folders with the dies, and you have 3D embossing folders in a couple different sizes. In order to use these, you need a die cut machine. So I have this very old Sizzix die cutting machine. This is a Big Shot fold away. I have not replaced this with a Stampin' Up! Cut and Emboss because I travel. So I do have a Stampin' Up! Cut and Emboss, and I have to tell you, I love it. I don't have to fuss around with which plates to use, because I'm using all Stampin' Up! Embossing folders and dies and things for the machine. So the layers that Stampin' Up! Tells me I need to put together to use the machine actually work. But with older machines, like I'm pretty sure I got this before Stampin' Up! Ever came out with, like this is so old. It was one of the first fold away, meaning these plates came down, because I used to have the big black Stampin' Up! One that was, you know, this size, and you needed a lot of space. I have a small craft space, so I really like the fold one. Stampin' Up's new machine also folds up, and it's very nice. They both have like nice handles on them, and that was something that I really liked too about it. So for me, now when you get your cutting machine, it usually comes with a stack of plates. You know, you'll get a stack of plates, and in general there's a platform, and then there's a thin die adapter, and there are a couple cutting plates. Stampin' Up's also includes an embossing plate, which is very nice. Now, this one didn't include that, but you'll notice that on these platforms, they usually have instructions about if you're using this product, here are the plates you need to use. If you're using these products, here are the plates you need to use. And they call that this sandwich of plates that you put your embossing folder between at some point, and they even show you where your embossing folder or where your paper should go and so forth. Now, this is for thin dies, so I'm going to move that aside because I'm embossing. And then it gives me instructions on how to emboss here, so that you know, if I'm using regular embossing folders, I do it one way. If I use 3D embossing folders, I do it another way. So for a regular embossing folder, for example, it says to use the platform, it says to use one of the cutting plates, and then it says to add the paper to your embossing folder. So I'm going to put a paper inside my embossing folder, just like that, and then I'm going to place this on my machine. Now, I always placed it so the fold is first, because that actually protects your embossing folder. There's a lot of pressure when you start cranking it. I don't know if you can see the crank here. When you start cranking it and start running it through, there's a lot of pressure, and if you actually put it through so the open part goes through first, it can actually catch one of the sides of your folder and not the other, and then pull them sort of in askew, and you can actually break that fold. So you want to put that fold in first, and then you put your top plate on, and then you crank it through. So that's for a regular embossing folder. My folder goes between the two cutting plates according to the directions right there. Okay, and the paper always goes inside the embossing folder. So now for the textured embossing folders, it tells me that for the 3D embossing folders, I should say, for the 3D embossing folders, your paper goes in between. So your paper goes inside this. I'm just using an already embossed piece because I'm not really running it through. And again, if you want to make sure it's straight, line it up with this line here. Like you can actually do that. Line it up with the line on the front, however you put it in, whether you put it in vertically or horizontally, just like that. And they say to put this down and then put one of the plates on top. But look what happens when I start running it through. It's putting no pressure, I'm getting no resistance. So it's not embossing it at all. So I had to try something else. So I tried putting the other plate on, just like I would do for regular embossing folders. Putting a plate on, then my embossing folder, then a plate, and I couldn't get it to go through at all. Like this was not going through. Once it hit the embossing folder, there was no cranking that baby through. So you don't want to force it because that will break your embossing folder. So then I pulled out the plate and thought, well, I'll try the thin die adapter put my plate on and then put this on. It still didn't go through. So my solution was to search my craft room, and I found this piece of tag board. It came in a packaging piece, and notice I've written 3D embossing shim on it, and I actually store it with my plates. It's getting kind of raggedy because it's catching on the edges a little bit, but I discovered if I put that on the top of my platform, and then I put my embossing folder with my paper, and then a cutting plate, this actually works nicely. And as I use it, it is compressing that cardboard a little bit, so I may need to either get a new piece of cardboard or add a couple sheets of paper. So it's a matter of experimenting to make sure you're getting the sandwich that you need to run your thing through. So if your machine is older, then you're going to need to do something like this. If you have the Stampin' Up! Cut and Emboss, I have not needed to adjust that at all. Although as your machine gets older, you may find that you need to adjust things. So just keep that in mind as you're using it, because it's all about the sandwich of the plates that you're using. So you have to experiment with your machine. So let's get on to the different techniques. Okay, so regular embossing. This is one of the techniques you'll find on that PDF, that printable PDF from my blog. I'm just taking a piece of cardstock. I've got it cut at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm going to put it between my, I'm going to put it inside my embossing folder. And if you wanted to line it up with the tops with this line so that it's straight, you could do that. I don't really need to do that because this pattern is pretty random, so I don't really worry about lining it up too much. And then I'm going to use the sandwich recommended for regular embossing folders by my particular die cut machine, and I'm going to run this through my machine. Okay, when I'm done running it through the machine, I can just pull this out, and I get this beautiful embossed background. Simple, this is simple embossing folder technique. So here's a card that I made with this, and I used that very same embossing folder. I pulled out one of the mixed media florals that I'd already had colored out and die cut. I added some of this really pretty Night of Navy and gold ribbon that you can get as one of the freebies. And I added a pre-made sentiment from the ephemera pack and 3 little, I forget what these are called. These are called two-tone sparkle gems. And I thought they matched or coordinated with that ribbon beautifully. So that is my card. I cut my panel down once I embossed it to 4 by 5 1/4, and I added a black mat behind there, and that was cut at 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and I've got a nice little pop of that black around the edge. So I love this card. I think it's very pretty and simple embossing, and you can see how much it elevates just that one little die cut that I made and the sentiment. It's so pretty. It just has a little bit of elegance to it. So I always love adding that. Now for my hybrid embossing folder, I've got my Beautiful Butterflies hybrid embossing folder, so I'm going to pull that die out of my die package, and I'm placing it in here so that cutting blade is up, and I'm going to add a piece of cardstock here. I'm going to put it like this in my machine, and I'm actually going to do it like this just to make it a little easier. And then I'm going to run it through my machine. Now this time I have to take that bottom cutting plate off, and I know from experimenting I need to add my shim. And you'll notice I actually have this shim labeled so I remember that this is what I've been using. Like if I don't do any embossing for a month, then I'll know. Remember, the fold goes first through the machine, just like that. So once I've run that through my machine, I can just pop this out. And I've got this piece that I'm going to use to make a shaker card. And then I've got this piece that I'm going to use on another card. Isn't that gorgeous? Look at that detail. So it cuts and embosses at the same time. I love this. And again, I'm going to use that same sandwich that I used for my my hybrid embossing folder. And you might need to use for the hybrid embossing folder the same sandwich you used for your regular embossing folders, but mine works best when I use the one for the 3D. So you have to experiment. Like you might want to experiment with some junky paper at first. So when I pull this out, this is what the hybrid embossing folder looks like, and you can see all of that texture and dimension. So if I pull out that regular embossing folder piece that I had, here's the regular embossing folder, here's the 3D embossing folder. And if I look at the back of that 3D, I still have a lot of texture on the back. So you could use either one of those sides that you wanted. You can use the embossed or the debossed side because the debossed side still has a lot of embossing. For the regular one, that's the embossed side, the front. Here's the back, and you can see it feels pretty smooth actually. Some people like to use this once in a while for just a different look, but you can see there's quite a difference. One tip I have for you with the 3D embossing folders is that if you're using, like I'm using regular basic white cardstock, but if you're using a thicker cardstock, one of the things you might have to do, if you run your paper through your embossing folder and you see that it's cracking, you might need to just give it a couple spritz of water before you run it through, and then run it through just like you normally would for a 3D embossing folder, and it won't hurt the paper at all, but that will prevent the cracking. Okay, so that's just a tip, and you'll need to give this time to dry before you go on and use it for any of, for making a card. So just put that aside and let that dry. I don't have trouble with that because I had to put a shim in, and my shim doesn't put so much pressure that it cracks my paper, and also I'm not using thicker, I'm not using super thick paper. If you're using like 110-pound paper, then you might have an issue with it cracking. So here are a couple of cards I made with that hybrid embossing folder, the beautiful butterflies, and I used the beautiful bokeh paper. If I tap it down, you can see that paper below it, and those are the embellishments that came with the set. They're called the Itty Bitty Bokeh Mix, and it's quite a colorful mix, so you can see the variety. I used the same little pretty sparkle gems that I used on my other cards, and one of the ephemera sentiments, and I did the same thing here. I used a small ephemera sentiment on this one, same sparkle gems, but this time, and I used the bokeh paper, but this time I actually used the embossing folder without die cutting it. I just used the center part to add a little bit of interest behind my butterfly. I lifted his wings a little. I only glued him down in the center, and I added some wink of Stella there for sparkle. hopefully you can see that. And so I've got 2 cards out of that one pass through the die cutting machine, and then I made I passed a piece of black through the die cutting machine. And don't forget, you can emboss on specialty papers as well. I'll do a separate video on that, but you can also definitely use your embossing folders with foil paper, with vellum, with aluminum foil, all kinds of different materials, so it's a lot of fun. So there's 2 more card ideas. Now the hybrid embossing folder, I've got several cards to share with you there after I've shown you the inking techniques, so let's move on to those. These sponge daubers, I bought this case on Amazon. I'll link it below, and I actually label my sponge daubers with the name of the color, and I just put part of the name because Stampin' Up! Gives them interesting names. They're usually easy to tell apart from the name that I'm using. So all you have to do is ink this up in your ink pad and just swirl it lightly on top of some of these little embossed pieces, and you want to get the ones hanging off the edge. You want to go around and get a few, and you just keep filling these in like this, and then you can take another color and start adding with another color just like this, and continue on until you fill the whole page. You can have a really pretty little background, a really colorful little background. If I take that same floral piece and bring that over, I get a very different look to that. Still pretty, but it's a very different background. So you can see that. And I actually like this. I actually just learned this technique from a retreat I went to, and I thought it was really fun. So I love that. Now the daubers don't work as well on these backgrounds so much. So I call these are direct to paper techniques. I'm taking my ink color and putting it right on the paper. I'm using the dauber tool to do it here. You can also use your blender brushes to add color to the backgrounds as well. Let's say I wanted to add a little color. Let me see if I have one that's got a little color that might work here. Let's say I want to add a little color to the edges. You can bring your other tool in and you can just go over the top, and you can add some color to that as well. I don't have too much ink on this, but you can see I'm adding a little color there, and you can make it as dark or as light as you want, and really, have fun with it. So you can use your blender brushes, you can use whatever tool you usually use for blending. But another technique that I really like to do, and it is a direct to paper technique, is I like to take my ink pad and just swipe the color on. And this is kind of messy. So I'm going to bring in my little silicone mat here, and I'm just going to hopefully not make too much of a mess. So I'm just going to very lightly pull the ink pad down the paper, just like that. And you can do this on either side of the embossed pieces, just like that. You need to touch it very lightly because you can see I'm getting some in between. So I like to practice. This is a very new and juicy ink pad, so it's hard to just get the raised parts. Like I'm just swiping this across very lightly. That's a direct to paper technique. And let me show you some other pieces that I did. So I did another one here in, I think this is Shy Shamrock. It's either Shy Shamrock or Summer Splash. This is Petunia Pop that I used. And here's the plaster, the painted plaster embossing folder, and this is just pulling the ink pad across that folder. Super pretty. And you can see it's not going to be perfect, so don't expect it to be. But you can always cut these panels down to use the parts that you like. That's what I do. So let me show you a couple of cards I made with these techniques. Here's one I made with the dauber technique. I just cut the panel down, I added a piece of petunia pot behind it, wrapped it in some ribbon, and used the little hugs bundle with the to the point punch. You can see I'm using the free ribbon from Celebration, the free sequins from Celebration. I'm using all my in colors there. I like that card. Then here's one where I just applied the ink directly by swiping, and I did a pretty good job on this one. I think this technique takes a little practice because you need a really light hand. Again, I cut it down, added this is definitely Shy Shamrock behind here, and used the little Darling Dinosaurs to create. You can see I've added some dimension with Stampin' Dimensionals there, again using the free ribbon and the free sequins, and I've got a super cute card. Isn't that background great? It almost looks like an animal print, and I use that soft waves background. I think that soft waves background would make beautiful grassy hills. Of course it will make beautiful ocean waves, but it made what I think looks like a fun animal print. And I think you could also do a really snowy scene. You could create a snowy scene with that too. So I think you could do some fun scene cards with that. But those two techniques I just shared with you, there you go. Those are two cards created with it, so you can see you get beautiful backgrounds. Now sometimes I did my embossing first and then added my color here. Sometimes I actually would like to be able to add color at the same time that I'm actually embossing. So let me show you a few of those techniques. So now I have 3 techniques I want to share with you to add color to your embossing folder and then do your embossing. So again, I'm referring to, when I say front cover, I mean the one with the Stampin' Up! Logo. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to take my ink pad. And I'm going to swipe down the inside of this embossing folder. So I'm just going to swipe my ink pad just like this, and I'm trying to get an even layer of ink on there. That's my goal. So now I can take a piece of cardstock, and I always put the cardstock in the back, and you can go either way with this. I'm going to go this way for now, and I'm going to close it, and I'm going to hold it really tight, and then I'm going to run it through my machine. So when I open this one up, and beware, it is a little messy, I get something that looks like this. I have a little bit of color. I like swiping the front because the embossed parts don't get any color. The debossed parts, the indents, get all the color. And depending on how heavily you put that ink on will determine how much of that actually how much of that color, how bright that color is what I'm trying to say. Now to clean this off, you can just give it a little squirt. And I just have an old junky microfiber cloth that I wipe this off with, because remember, these are water-based dye inks, and like dissolves like, so they clean up nicely with water. There you go. Usually you can just wipe them right off. Here's a card I made using that very technique. You can see I did this only with the Shy Shamrock, using that same, I forget what this bundle is called. I'll have the bundle linked below, but isn't that cute? Super cute. Again, I used the free ribbon and the free sequins from Celebration. Remember, celebration ends at the end of February, but I love that. I did add some journaling pen detail to the flowers just to make them pop a little bit. I kind of liked the way that turned out, but how cute is that? It's just another thing to add to your cards to make it more interesting. Now, two other ways you can do this. So this is just swiping it on the inside front cover, and I'll show you some more samples. I want to show you some samples of that plaster painted one. Oh my goodness. Now, this time, front cover, I'm opening this up, and I am swiping this on the back cover. So this technique, I swipe on the back cover, and I always put my paper down, run this through my machine. Okay, again, I'm just going to have this down here. So here you go. And this one's pretty fun. I didn't get this much beading with my green ink. I'm getting more beading with my Petunia Pop, and I'm not sure why that is. But you can see I get a lot more ink, or I get a lot more color than I did on the front. Here's the front, here's the back, because this time now I'm getting more ink in the larger, what was embossed on the front is debossed on the back, and those are the wider stripes for this particular folder. So every folder looks a little different. So this is the front, this is the back. Now, there's one other thing you can do. Okay, I'm going to pull my little silicone back in, and I'm going to do the inside of the front again, and I'm going to try it again with this ink. I'm just going to swipe that ink down a couple of times like that, and I've got one more piece of paper I can use, but this time I'm going to spritz it with a little water, flip it closed, and now I'm going to run it through my machine one more time. So here's the result that I got when I ran it through with water. I actually really like this result because it kind of spreads the ink around a little, so you get different tones of the ink, and you get some with where there wasn't any water squirted at all, so it gives kind of a pretty almost a watercolory background, and you can see that looks really pretty with a floral in front. Maybe not this floral, but that looks really pretty. And I also did this with the back. So this was the front with no water. This is the front with water. You can see the difference between those two. Here's the back, and then here's the back with water. So you can see the difference if you add a little bit of water. I also wanted to show you the painted plaster one. Here's one where I just did the front cover, and you can see I got a lot of color here because there were a lot of debossed parts on that one. Here's one where I swiped the front cover and squirted it with water, which really spread the water around a lot. Then here's the one where I swiped the back cover, and I really like that one. I don't think I have one with the with adding water, but I think I really like the adding the water, especially to the wave one. I definitely will try it with this at some point. But there you go, and you can see. Now, if you do swipe with water, remember that you will absolutely want to leave those to dry until you cut them. Okay, so you can see how cute the cards are that you make when you use some of these inking techniques. Like, you can get really sweet little cards, and depending on the color, like I used bright pops of color here, but if you use more subtle colors, you're going to get more subtle backgrounds that will go with whatever image you're trying to use. So friends, I hope you like this. Please give this video a thumbs up. Now on my blog at stampingimperfection.com, there's a tab at the top that says techniques, and you need to go check that out because you will find free printables for that. Let me show you what I have. I have these free printables, and this got a little wet because I put one of the papers on top of it that I spritzed. But I've done 8 different techniques here. I included plain basic embossing, 3D embossing, and hybrid embossing. So you can actually do include those in your technique binder. I actually am doing mine like this. I really like this method. So when I've got a whole bunch of techniques on that tab. So all my other technique videos are there, and all of my free printables are there. Please help yourself. And I would love it if you would like to place an order with Stampin' Up! If you shop in my online store at shopwithkim.net, I would love that. And here you can see I just did basic embossing, then I did the daubers, then I did the ink swiping direct to paper technique, then I showed my 3D folder, and then I did one of the hybrid folders, and then I added ink to the inside front cover, inside back cover, and then I did one where I spritzed it with water. And then I'm moving on to other techniques beyond that also. So I've got techniques on heat embossing, now dry embossing. I've got lots of emboss resist techniques. I've got all kinds of masking techniques. I've got ink blending techniques. Some of my favorite techniques are in here for doing specialty things. I've got masking techniques, spritzing with water, ombre blending, dauber dots, and then I've got, of course, the first ones you always learn when you do them. So all my favorite techniques are in this binder, and I've got so many more to go. So if you'd like to get these free printables and create your own little technique binder, it's great to flip through when you're trying to decide what to do. So I have these sized to be 3 by 4 inches, so you can just cut them down, print them out, cut them down, and then I cut down a piece of the technique that I did, and I just adhere them to a piece of white cardstock. And this is just one of those little photo album things you get at like CVS or excuse me, you get it at like Target or Walmart or CVS. They're all over the place for not very much. You can buy like a set of 12 on Amazon for also not too much money, and you can fit 48 techniques in each one, and I'm almost done with one. So I'm working my way through this, and as I do it, I make a video and make the printable so you can have those printables. So those will be available on my blog at stampingimperfection.com. And again, I'd love it if you give this video a thumbs up, and if you're new and not subscribed, I would love it if you subscribe and click that bell to get notifications every time I upload a new video. So thank you so much for watching, friends. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope that you enjoyed this, because I have been playing like crazy with these different backgrounds and different techniques and things, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. So, give these a try and see what you can come up with.